Hello, today we're talking to the top UK psychotherapist who wrote the bestseller What About the Children, who featured on many UK TV shows. A person who works with children, adolescents and their families, who is very, very special. Today we're talking to Julie Lynn Evans. Julie consults on many issues related to development and psychological growth of children and adolescents in the International Education Centre Summit. And we would like to discuss with Julie today how to better prepare international children on entering in the UK boarding schools and day schools as well. Hello, Julie.
Good morning, Eliana.
Good morning. What about this dog? When I used to come to you, I always see Charlie, and Charlie I know is a therapeutic dog.
Yes, this is Princess Charlie Puggle, and she's 8 years old. And I don't believe I could do my job without her, because she looks after children when they're unhappy or if there's silence is in the room, and children will often talk to her and not to me. And she's a vital part of my work, and I love her very much. And so do the children who come to this consulting room.
Okay. I remember how much Charlie was helpful to me and how much Charlie was helpful to my children as well.
And she always goes to the people who need her the most in the room. So obviously I need her right now because of the camera. But she's a very special little dog.
Okay. So as we discussed, I would like you to shed some light. How do we prepare international children? Because obviously that's a much tougher job for the parents of international children to prepare them to enter UK educational system. So why don't we start with the little kids? What is the role of the parent? How they can prepare better them for the entry level of 11 plus. And as I understand, there would be mostly girls who are coming on that age.
Yes, the English education system has developed over the years, over hundreds and hundreds of years, and perhaps has no rhyme or reason because it's a historical development. And girls go into mainstream secondary schools at about 11 on the whole. Boys go in at 13. And then there's a bit of a mix-up sometimes at 16. So when you're thinking about entry into 11, if you're thinking about boys into the private sector, they would be going at the tail end of a primary school, which perhaps isn't ideal because there's already a cohort. But girls go into something completely new. So it's really thinking about getting girls ready. It has special challenges. I mean, first of all, I think a parent is incredibly brave to think about and allow their child to go off at 11 into another country, because in the main, parents really love their children. They want their best for their children. If they're thinking about sending them with all the expense and the bother entailed to a London private or an English private school, it means that they probably are sacrificing a hell of a lot and love their children very much. It's not like they're getting rid of them. It's how can we give them the best, because our education system is extremely good and considered to be good worldwide. And there's an awful lot of preparation that can be done and probably needs to be done. Because I'm a psychotherapist, I see worst case scenarios, and I'll be talking about some of the difficulties that the majority of your clients won't be experiencing, but I think we need to look at. So they sort of pick up the edge of the duvet and say, what problems could there be? But let's look at some generalities to start with. First of all, as is obvious and other members of your team and your consultants will be talking about, is get ready for the academic work. That would mean getting past papers for the 11 plus, finding out exactly what the 11 plus entails. We have maths always, English always, verbal and non-verbal reasoning papers, and children really need to start to be prepared at those at about 9. Because if they're in Russia and the Russian system, it'll be a completely different language and something utterly that they haven't seen before. And you don't want to shock the poor 11-year-olds or frighten them. They need to be used to them, like sort of breathing air. So that's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is to make sure that the children can speak as much English as possible, because entering a school without a good grasp of a language makes you automatically very lonely. And I think the children are going to be very lonely anyway, because they're going to be far from home. So I think, really go for English lessons and immersion in English. I mean, perhaps English holidays and English camps. Another thing which fits in with that is I think that children need to be ready to move away from home. And so sleepovers as much as possible, and camps, perhaps, as I said, in English-speaking camps to get used to the English. The children will be moving into dormitories. The English are not terribly good at comfort. So the dormitories at 11 could easily be 12 to a dormitory, 14 to a dormitory with bunk beds and loos down the corridors. And the food isn't always fantastic. I mean, boarding school is 300% better than it used to be in the 1960s, but it's still not 5-star comfortable. So if the children are used to sleeping in dormitories away from home, that would be a very good thing to do. So lots and lots of camps away from home. And then there's another important thing which won't apply to many of your clients, but will apply to some, is that 11-year-olds, if there are problems at home, they very often don't want to leave home, because they feel responsible to make sure that the home sticks together. So if there are financial problems or health problems or family problems in terms that the parents aren't getting on very well, or a child who isn't really thriving, who might be about 8 or something, 11-year-olds are very responsible, intuitive, empathetic beings. And I find that very often they don't want to leave home, not because they are refusing to go to where the parents are trying to send them, but they want to stay where the parent is so they can look after them. So one way to prepare an 11-year-old to leave well is to make sure things are as good as possible at home. And if things aren't good, because it's impossible to have a happy life all the time, is to show the child that the parents are in charge of that particular situation and that they are safe to leave. I think that's very important. So just to recap, is prepare academically, prepare so that you get away from home and you're not homesick, get used to homesickness, learn the language as well as possible, and show the child they're not responsible for maintaining an okay status quo at home, that the parents can look after themselves.
That's amazing recap, and that's actually the last point that you made is absolutely stunning, because that opens a lot on the psychology of the children, because parents a lot think about children as the little beings that we as parents have to take care of them, and avoiding thinking that actually a lot of time that tiny little being is actually thinking and knowing a lot more about what's going on. And all these little whispers and all those phone calls, we think that children don't know.
Oh, they know, particularly now with the internet.
Yeah. I remember somebody saying, actually, before you decided to divorce or before you decided to move homes, children know about that.
Yes.
Somebody else.
And a lot of the school truancy problems I deal with in England are not because the children are being naughty or hate the school. It's they run away to go home to check that mummy or daddy are all right. Now, if you're sent all the way from Russia into an English boarding school and you think mummy and daddy are not all right, or you've been sent there because of something, mummy's ill and she's not telling you, those children are pretty miserable. So it's very good to have as open a book as possible and to show the children that you can cope without them.
That's an amazing insight. Thank you very much, Julie, on that. If we move progressively in the age group, and now we are thinking about giving a sort of advice to parents who are in the next level, which is 13 plus. And obviously you gave a very good advice to look like 1 or better 2 years in advance, because you have to start preparing children for the 13 plus like at least 2 years in advance. What kind of advice you would give to those parents, how to prep international children better for that entry?
So the 13 plus is quite difficult. It isn't just maths and English and verbal and non-verbal reasoning, it's all the subjects across the board, and that must be quite peculiar for a Russian child to be learning about Henry VIII or the Second World War from the English point of view, and they've got to do it. So again, it's pick up the curriculum and have a really good look at what is needed. Also, the schools have mark systems, so you either need to get 50% to get in, 55%, 60% or 65%. You need to know the mark systems and also have a good idea of your child's native intelligence, because asking a 50% child to go to a 65% school is asking for real trouble, because why on earth would we be hammering the psyche of a child into somewhere where they don't fit. So find out how bright your child is, if you can, or what your feeling is, and don't use ambition, use intuition. Then prepare again, get the curriculum and have a look at what they're going to be asked. And also find out from Russia what the special needs are for Russian intake into the English system. That's the first thing. The second thing is, again, to make sure that home life is as good as possible. Boys usually move into the 13 plus. Quite a lot of girls do too, but it's mainly boys going to 13 plus at our schools. And boys can get very, very protective of their mothers. So if there is something where the boy feels protective of his mother, the mother and the boy need to work that out with the father, that he doesn't need to protect. It's his life, he's 13, he's the child. So let him move peacefully onto the next stage. It's very important to imbue a child who's moving into the English states sector, the private sector, with their own sense of ethics and morals, if you possibly can do that. Private boarding schools are a cauldron, a casserole of all types of children from all different walks of life. And there are drugs, there are cigarettes, there is alcohol. Children are experimenting. It is an adolescent melting pot, just as it would be in any city. And it's very, very important for children coming from a long way away that they know how to behave, because if they get caught misbehaving badly, their parents aren't there to support them, to take them away for a time out, to be able to talk to them. So the children need a good ethical and moral code in as far as possible about what are the rules and the regulations or the boundaries of a particular household. So if the parents smoke cigarettes, the child might think it's fine to smoke cigarettes. He probably needs to be guided about why it's not a good idea to smoke cigarettes at school, and he could easily do that. So give him a good moral grounding or an ethical grounding that suits the family values, because there will be so many temptations in the private sector after the age of 13. It's just how it is, and it's how it's always been. I think with the internet now, it's very easy to stay in touch with your child, but at the beginning, when they first arrive, it's quite important not to stay in touch with your child too much. School fees are very large. It's a huge investment for any family to be paying, and if you're choosing a school, you need to be able to trust that school. So for the first month or so, minimal Skype calls, minimal WhatsApp, so that the child can really fit in and get ready to find their own friends and move away from home.
Can you please elaborate on that? Because me being Russian, I know that this sort of advice comes as a shocking advice for any Russian mother. It would be counterintuitive for a mother not to make too many calls, not to try to support a child in the very few months that follow upon arrival. I kind of understand it because I've put my children through boarding schools, but
Okay.
can you please...
So a mother knows absolutely the best of what she's doing for her child. But in the school situation, the school knows the best what they're doing for the child. And what I've noticed again and again and again is if the child is always on the phone or trying to find the mother on the phone or rushing between classrooms or before lunch and trying to find their mother, they're not integrating with their other friends. They're not finding other people who are also homesick. They're not building the connections that they need to connect. What they're doing is they're still connecting with their parents and they're not going outwards. And so there's this whole world and mass going on which they're not part of. So that's one reason. The other reason, of course, is if you find your mother and you cry, because you do cry when you're talking to your mother, whereas you put a brave face on it perhaps when you're not, is you want her more. You don't have time to move on and say, okay, well, I got through that and there's the matron, and actually that pudding was really rather delicious and I enjoyed that game of tennis. I think I'll go and join the hockey team. You say, oh no, I can't do that because I need to talk to mum. And then the tears go on for much, much longer.
Okay. That's
So-
a very good point, and that's exactly how I felt. That separation anxiety, and sometimes you have to stop contacting your child, and it's sort of sometimes happens also with the much younger children when this separation anxiety comes even in the kindergarten, when sometimes even in the Russian kindergarten, what happens, they ask you please leave a child and go away quickly, because the tears actually, they dry very
Absolutely.
soon.
Well,
And if you just stay and say, oh, mommy's here,
You're
mommy's
extending
there,
the
you're just
agony.
extending, you're cutting the tail of, you know, dog that needs to be cut the tail, like in a tiny
Yes,
little
you're
pieces.
really extending the agony, and that applies to the 11-year-olds, and it also applies to the 13-year-olds. You know, the children at that time need to get autonomy and move away from the parents, which is why you're sending them, that's their developmental job, which is why you're sending them to school. So it's a double message of, we're sending you away, but oh, I need to check you're all right, are you all right? And they'll go, no. And all the children that I know who have the hardest time with homesickness are far better if they're left to their own devices and to the matron and the housemaster and the teachers. You can always ring the housemaster and the matron as much as you like. They might get a bit bored of you, but you know, you'll know that they're okay. But don't get too much in touch with your child, because every time you get in touch with your child, it means they're not going round to somebody else's room to look at something interesting that they've got in their wardrobe or something.
Julie, thank you very much for these 2 steps. So we covered what is important for the first step, which is 11 plus. We covered what kind of challenges would embark children at 13 plus entry. If we move on now for the 16 plus, or what is called now A level, can you please talk about these challenges?
A-level entry is completely different to 11 plus and 13 plus, because by then children have developed their own sense of autonomy. If they've done their job, they've moved away from their parents, their curfews are much longer, they probably have their own pocket money and know how to deal with that. They know who their friends are, and they're beginning to know who they like and what they want. Feelings of over-responsibility for parents are not so important, because they realise that their parents are themselves and they are their selves. So it's much more a question of how do they move over here and get the most out of it, stay safe, communicate with their parents. I mean, a healthy 16 or 17-year-old doesn't talk to their parents. The biggest cry for help that I get from the parents is, could you make my children talk to me more? And I say, well, actually, no, they're being healthy because they're learning how to move on, and you're not that important to them anymore. And I think that's a really big thing to understand, is if you're in another country and you send your children away, you probably won't hear from them very much. And that's a very, very good sign, because they're developing and they're growing into their own people. And what a wonderful opportunity to be educated in another country as you really come up to 18. It's quite normal that children doing A-levels are coming up to 18, and you learn so much. So I think it's much easier for parents from another country to send their children on in the A-level years. 16, 17, 18. I don't think they need to be so worried about homesickness, over-responsibility, children not being able to look after themselves. I think where one needs to do a due diligence is to think about money. How much pocket money should they have, and how much access to money should they have? And I think really good advice needs to be taken from that, from the headmaster at the school, from peers within Russia, from peers within England if you know them, because it's very, very sad if your child has too little, but it's actually much more dangerous if your child has too much. Spending money run riot is a great pity, and I do see that with international clients coming over, is the parents basically haven't done their research and don't know what the other children are getting. So a child might get £500 a week in English money.
Oh my God.
Yeah, completely normal, or access to a credit card which they can take out any money they want, and the parents are thinking that's keeping the child safe, but actually it's going on alcohol and Ubers and things that really children shouldn't be having at this time. Or on the other hand, children are sent with £5, and that won't get them anywhere, and they can't get on the tube, and they can't get on the train, and they can't join their friends at Costa or something. So I think sorting out money is really important. I think sorting out material goods is really, really important. In England, the traditional English and the traditional English schools are not that flashy. You know, it's quite normal to shop in thrift shops, or it's quite normal to give the children only a certain amount of money for clothes. And so a surfeit of flashy clothes and flashy handbags and any flash at all actually doesn't do the child good if they want to fit in. And it doesn't help with true connection and true friendships. And again, there's an amount of freedom. What is the freedom a child is allowed at the weekends? Because again, most boarding schools will let sixth formers out by Saturday lunchtime, and they don't have to be back by Sunday. What are the rules when they're out? I've seen an awful lot of international kids not terribly well guided over weekend time, and quite a lot of trouble happens then with falling into bad habits. So work out the boundaries for weekend behaviour, work out the boundaries for money spending, work out the boundaries for pocket money, work out the boundaries for curfew, and who is the person at 16, 17, 18 who a child will ring if there's any trouble at all. Because of course a 16, 17, 18-year-old thinks they're the king of the world and they think they can sort everything out. But in fact, if they've lost their credit card and their phone is out of battery and they've met somebody who's not particularly kind to them, then they do need somebody in England who they can call because they're in trouble. So it's sort of looking after them secretly and making sure that they're safe, but in a very subtle way.
Discreet.
Discreet, exactly. And so that they don't think you're threatening their autonomy, so that they're really cross with you. Because if they're cross with you, they'll just go underground and you won't hear from them, and you'll be worrying like hell in Russia, what on earth are they doing? And they could be being quite naughty over here. I think this, for the 16-year-olds, it's to look after them with discretion and be aware that London particularly is a place of temptation, and they will be allowed to London quite often. So to make sure that they're safe, make sure they don't have too much money or too little money, and make sure that they've got somebody like a godfather or a guardian or somebody who really cares for their child and accepts their child as a place and a point of call should there be any trouble. For instance, if a child comes down with glandular fever, who would look after that child until the parent can get home? Or get to them, for instance. By the time educationally the child is applying at 16, they will have decided what they like studying. In England we go quite specialist in our subjects with this thing called A-levels, and really we only choose between 3 and 4 subjects, and it could be mostly the sciences or the arts. If you go the IB route, that's very different. But I would expect a child from an international place to beginning to know what it is that they're going to want to specialise in when they get here. So again, be ready to support the child in their choices. I personally believe we go too narrow too fast in England, but it is what it is. And they need a certain level of success in high school up to the age of 16. They might need a tutor before they reach 16 in order to help them with the subjects that they're going to specialise in, because they need this higher level for attainment to get in.
What is your experience? Because you have seen a lot of British clients, but as well a lot of international clientele came and sat on your couch.
With my dog.
With the dog, and look how migrated Charlie. She's now feeling that you're safe.
Yeah, I've relaxed. So
you're
she's
relaxed.
left me.
Just it's a proof that you're feeling very good. Let us wrap up this very, very productive talk, and I hope that our viewers really felt now the essence of 3 groups of children in terms of age, and how parents should prepare these international children on the entry in the private schools of England.
And I just want to go back to another thing, just with the 16-year-olds again, for all of them, is send them to loads and loads of sleepovers and away, and perhaps ones which specialise in teaching English, make them as fluent as possible in the English, but it's get them away as much as possible so they get used to looking after themselves and not being entirely comfortable.
Yes, of course.
Because boarding schools are not entirely comfortable.
Yes. Otherwise we're sending them to Swiss to spoil them. I totally understand. Thank you very much that you pointed it out, because I'm a big proponent of a British system of education, and even though I have my own personal experiences with establishing education in 4 countries, in England, United States, France and Russia. However, in my personal experience, I believe that the most value has been added by British system of education, and that's why our centre is actually focusing right now on giving education in England. What sort of values would you say, if properly prepared, if properly conditioned, children would gain from private education in England?
To learn to trust themselves, to learn to think, to learn to study, to learn connection, a deep connection with other people, how to live with other people and to live with other people well. A way of extracting the best from each child. If a child is sporty, I can think of many, many schools where the sports facilities are absolutely excellent, that they would be guided towards that, or to drama, or to pottery. I'm thinking of a particular school which has pottery world class, and for children who are not completely academic, it is wonderful to watch them, to be able to be sent towards that, and those pots and things shown at the end of the year. I think it's connection with others and learning how to live with others well. well, and having the chance to find out what you're really good at and what makes your heart sing. And you also have to overcome stuff on your own without being saved. You know, it's interesting, in England we use the word helicopter mothers a lot, who just sort of zoom around saying, why hasn't my child got that 98th mark when they've got a 97th? And I'm going, for God's sake, 97 is amazing. But when helicopter mothers put their children into these private boarding schools, they can't helicopter anymore, and the child is saved from being saved, has then to find their own feet. And boarding schools in England now are so different than they were in the 1960s. They're kind places, they're places with good pastoral care, and children are really well looked after while being encouraged to work out what they want, who they are, and how to find themselves. And you get pretty rounded kids. I'm very impressed by the generation of children coming out at the moment who really care about the environment, who understand classical music, and who can do a whole range of things. I love talking to them and listening to them because they're very, very well rounded and not at all entitled. And I don't like how the entitlement used to be from the boarding schools, let's say, of 20 years ago. That's being knocked out of them too. So I like the kids who are being produced with our English boarding schools at the moment.
Same here. That's actually why I love it so much, and that's why talking to youngsters and how they produced, kind of squeezed the best out of them and brewed it, and then made these children to fly and flourish. The example of my own children, I can see that, and I can see how independent they become and how just better human being they become. You know, it's kind of like a hindsight. When I came to you with my project, I remember how you was calling me, what, Jeanne d'Arc of Russian education? Where is my dream actually? The more people of going through that system, the more we change as a society, the more people we put on the governmental boards, whether they are in Russia, in England or somewhere else, the more we can hope for our planet as a whole, that maybe those people entitled for the running of the educational system, whether it's in Russia or in UK, they will produce better schools and better maybe state education as well. And my mission, my goal in life is just to try to educate as many people as possible, and so that they come back to Russia and try to move forward. So we're wrapping up. Thank you so very much for all your beautiful insights. So I really hope that mothers right now, and fathers as well, who are thinking and contemplating about sending their children to English education system, they have much better understanding on how to prepare their children into entering boarding and day schools in England. Here we are. I have been talking to the top UK psychotherapist, Julie Lynn Evans. Thank you very much.